Hi, AJ Hartley here, novelist, Shakespeare professor, fan of lots of stuff. But this particular video is going to be part of my continuing series on publishing. It was a response to questions I was getting, not just about writing, but about how people actually get published. And so I'm interviewing established writers to talk about their particular route to getting their stuff out in the world. And I'm talking particularly to people who know things that I don't, because I do a certain kind of publishing and other people do other things. So in this case, I'm talking to Eric R. Asher, who's a urban fantasy, steampunk, and various other kinds of spec fic author who is primarily self-published, has done a lot with audio, and has expertise in things like advertising and Kickstarters and stuff like that. So that's what we're going to talk about. All of this I know nothing about. So I think you'll find this helpful and interesting. Enjoy. Okay, so welcome to Eric R. Asher. I'm not used to thinking of you as the Eric R. Asher. I just think of you as Eric. So when I was looking for you online and I was like, Eric Rasher, who's that? So,
Yeah. Yeah,
so
there's definitely somebody out there with a Eric Asher Gmail address that gets a lot of my stuff.
I was trying to think. We probably in your last email to me, you said you'd been publishing for 5 years. I thought it was longer than that.
I have been publishing longer than that. I've been a full-time author for about 5 years.
Oh, okay.
So I've
Okay.
been publishing since 2013.
Right. Okay. That makes a lot more sense because I was like, I've known you way longer than that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So maybe you could outline very briefly what you do, and then we'll walk through your career in terms of specifically in terms of publishing and talk about what has worked for you, what you would recommend, pros and cons, all that kind of stuff. You are primarily self-published, right?
That is correct.
And one of the two things that we particularly want to get to today is audiobooks and Kickstarters. But everything within the self-pub world, I think, is interesting and stuff that I mostly don't know anything about. Let's talk about what you do first. What kind of writing do you do, and how did you get started?
All right. So mainly I work in like the sci-fi fantasy spaces, so mostly speculative fiction. And I don't know what I'm best known for anymore. I used to always say my Vesic series, but that was an urban fantasy series that I started back in 2013. And after that, I wrote my Steamborn series, which has dramatically overtaken my Vesic stuff on audio. So that's
Hmm.
kind of like my main income source now. And
And that's the steampunk series.
yes, yes, that is a steampunk series. And um lately I've been working on my first cozy fantasy. So that is getting ready to come out this December. Yes, yeah, thank you. Thank you for the plug. Yeah, and I'm really excited about that one. That's one that I've had the story idea for a long time.
I'm nearly finished. Nearly
Oh,
finished.
awesome. Yeah, I love those built-in ribbon bookmarks from the
Yeah,
Kickstarter
it's a
edition.
beautiful book. It's a lovely. I mean, it's one of the things we should talk about at some point because, I in the old days, self-published books, you could tell, you know,
Yes.
you take one look at
Yes.
those covers and such, but this is beautiful, lavish, illustrated, lovely.
I love it. Yeah, and like the gilded edges and the yeah.
Yeah.
I'm a fan. Um, yeah, so that was, and we'll definitely get into that Kickstarter stuff because that it's a whole new world out there. Yeah, so it's hopefully that goes well. I had that idea a long, long time ago, but I was just like, I don't know what this book is. I'm not sure what I want to do with it.
Mhm.
And so I really just kind of sat on it for about 7 years. And I got a chance to read an early edition, like before it was published, of Travis Baldry's Legends and Lattes. And I loved it so much. And then I got to see like where he went with it from like the early drafts to the final thing. And it was like, wow, I think this is kind of the direction I want to go in. I want to write a cozy And it kind of clicked in my head that like, oh, well, something set in a theme park, just talking about things that you love and things that you
Mm.
enjoy, like it's a perfect setting for it. So
It's
that's
a
kind
brilliant, I
of
think it's a terrific premise. It's really, really strong. Anyway,
thank you.
so your first publications were you self-published first?
Yes, yes, I
Okay.
was.
So
And
let's talk about that.
yeah. So my very first book was Days Gone Bad, which I wrote in I think I wrote the original version of it in around 2007. Um and it's an urban fantasy, and if you read the first one, it's definitely got some first novel issues that could have been polished a little bit more before it hit the press, but everything's a learning experience.
Let's talk about, did you choose right from the get-go to self-publish? Did you pursue other options first? I don't know, do you have an agent? I don't even know.
I did for a while. Originally I did not.
Mhm.
So I was doing research on submitting to agents and like what genres they were really shopping at the time. And it was, I think, in 2011 where KDP really started to take off. And as I was getting ready to start submitting to agents, I got enticed by the KDP royalties, where it's like,
So let's clarify what KDP is.
so KDP is Kindle Direct Publishing. So it's Amazon's like self-publishing arm. And I got totally pulled in by the 70% royalties because it was like, oh, I can sell this number of books myself to equal what I would have gotten out of a contract at the time, which the only agent I has talked to, like 15% was as good as they were willing to kind of hand me on the back end. And I was like, well, I think I'll roll the dice and try the self-publishing thing.
Mhm.
And that was a rough learning experience at first. Like I had a cover that first came out that really wasn't professional enough. Like we've talked about before, sometimes when you see something that's self-published, you know it was self-published. Um, but that is something that I always try to attain now is like if you look at one of my books, I don't want any question like I don't want that to pop into somebody's head like, oh, what was the publishing route of this? I want
Yeah.
everything to be professional.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, 70% is immense as a royalty, you know?
Yeah.
And most authors are getting about 10 on in traditional publishing. So now what people will often say, of course, is that but your traditionally published book has more visibility because it's in stores and things like that. Whether that actually equates to larger sales, of course, isn't necessarily the case at all. So let's talk a bit about what you actually had to do to take your whatever it was, Microsoft Word document, your novel, and turn it into something that people can buy.
So yeah, absolutely. One big thing, there's an adage in publishing that money always flows to the writer. And in self-publishing, that is not necessarily the case. So you want a professional product at the end. And I'm not saying that if you don't do this, you can't be successful because there's always an outlier or whatnot. But to give yourself the best chance of being successful, what I did is I went into it, I had it professionally edited, uh, and that I looked out there. I met my editor on like a group critique writing shop or writing website, critters.org, actually, which is run by Andrew Burt, who you may know from SFWA. And from there, we went to the beta readers, which I only had about five at the time. So editing, beta readers, back to the editing to polish things up, and then a proofreader on the back end. Once that was ready to go, I hired a formatter, which was quite inexpensive. And what the formatter did is he took that Word document and created the EPUB, the PDFs for the print files, and all that sort of thing. From there, I hired a cover artist. And once we had the formatted PDF for publishing, the cover artist had all the page count information they needed, and they took care of all that for me. Originally I was like, oh, maybe I can do this myself. But as soon as I got into it, I'm like, this is not my wheelhouse.
You thinking aesthetically or technically?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
So over the years I've learned how to do like all of the formatting and whatnot, but I still prefer to have someone else do it for me because
Right.
I don't have to like kind of think like, oh, did I do this correctly? Did I make a huge mistake?
Right.
So you can find a good formatter for, $100 a book, which can save you a lot of trouble.
So I was going to say, in terms of, if you don't mind saying, initial costs to set this thing up ready to go, what are we talking?
So for me, an average book right now, it depends greatly on length because you usually pay your editor by word count. So, like for an example, an 80,000 word book might come in around $1,500 for editing right now. Depending on your cover artist, you could spend anywhere between 250 to like thousands of dollars. It just kind of depends on who you work with. On average, for me, I'm usually coming in around $500 right now between the illustrations and the typography. So, beginning to end can be around $2,500 just for the actual hiring of my team. And that's until you touch audiobooks.
Right. Well, let's hold off on audiobooks for a second. So 2,500 is really interesting. And of course, one of the differences between what you're doing and what traditional publishing is doing is that all those people who you're hiring answer to you. So that gives you greater control, right? People sometimes don't realize that, in traditional publishing, we are generally given a cover. And, I've had a number of times where I'm like, oh, yeah, I really like this, but maybe we can do this and maybe you could tweak this or change this color and they say, no, 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 you don't understand. This is the cover. It's done, you know. Um, and sometimes you get to contribute feedback and such early in the process, but sometimes you don't. Sometimes you just it is what it is. And I've had covers that I really liked and covers that I was less keen on. So you're not going to have that kind of problem because you can direct everything, particularly so long as you're prepared to pay for it. Likewise, editorial, I've had moments where people have said, we really think you should change this. And I've had to sort of weigh it. And sometimes you say, okay, fine, no problem. Sometimes you dig your heels in a little bit. And then it becomes a little bit of a game of chicken where, one of you is going to, either the editor or you are going to flinch because ultimately the editor doesn't work for me. The editor works for the publishing house. And there's always the possibility that the editor might say, okay, it's your book. I can't force you to change it. But if you don't want to do this, we're not going to publish. Right? So that's always a possibility. So you don't have to have that. Um, and presumably has pros and cons attached to it as well, right? I mean,
Oh yeah.
I've seen self-pubbed books that were professionally edited where they needed to be better.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. Like it's a double-edged sword. Like more control, like sure, I get final say and like, oh, I'm not going to listen to my editor on this, but you learn pretty fast that maybe you should have listened to your editor on that. But it's really been priceless for me. My main editor is Laura Matheson, and I've been working with her for most of my career now. And it's priceless to have someone if you're writing, for example, a 20 book series that
Mm.
edits the entire thing because they kind of build their own series Bible to go with it. They keep track of everything. Yeah, she has saved me some big mistakes. So
And let me just pick up on that number. Were you talking about a 20 book series? Because this is another thing that you can and are doing that most traditionally published authors cannot. So you started publishing in 2013, you said?
yes, yes.
How many books have you published since 2013?
Uh 30, 32, 33.
That's a lot of books.
A few of those are novellas, but yeah, it's up there.
Now, in traditional, so and and this is a related question, from the moment that you write the end on your manuscript to the moment that the book goes up for sale, what kind of time lag are we talking?
It varies. It can be very short. Like I've had some that we knocked out in as little as 90 days because like the cover art was done while I was still writing the book. So
Mhm.
then all we had to do was get through the editing, hit the deadlines. My formatter can usually turn something around within a day or two. And after that, it's just I log into my dashboards and upload everything and off it goes. I generally wouldn't suggest that, but it is possible.
But within a few months is fairly doable for you.
Yes, yes.
So, I mean, as opposed to, again, if you're working with a big house, you turn in the manuscript, it's going to be 18 months before that book appears.
Sure.
And it's a long, slow editorial process and the cover stuff going on at the same time, but also research and marketing and various placement stuff and what have you. And, it can take as much as 2 years. I don't think that's uncommon. I've heard of books taking much, much longer. That usually means changes in editorial staff at the publishing house or something like that. But people who waiting for books that they finished 5 years ago and are still not out, I think a year is still just about possible, but that's considered fast. And I think most small presses are looking at about a year as well. So when I'm saying how many books have you done, part of what I'm saying is you have the capacity to produce a great deal more than most traditional publishers. And of course, you also are not having to deal with non-compete clauses in which a publisher might say, not only is this going to take us a lot longer to publish it, but you are not allowed to do more books in this series until we go through our natural process, You've got a
Ooh,
5 book series and it's going to take us 7 years to publish it or whatever. Whereas you might do 5 books in a year. Or I mean that's a lot. But
I I did
but you
that once. I don't want to do that again.
but you can, right? I mean, this is
Yeah.
the point. So you can generate a lot more product and get it out to readers faster. And some readers, I'm sure you've heard this, readers say, well, I'm not going to read book one of that series until the whole series is out,
Oh yeah.
which is the kiss of death for a lot of writers, because it's like, well, if you don't read it, there won't be a series
It's
because the
so
publisher is
true.
going to cancel it.
It's so true. And I hear often like, oh, that's only a problem in traditional publishing. Like, no, no, it's not. It's a problem for like indies and self-pubs. I mean, it's yeah, because then we put a book out and it's like, well, that didn't sell. I guess nobody wanted to read it. And
And that's
it's
costing you money, right? You're fronting
oh yeah,
thousands of dollars, so
yeah,
you need to be making a certain amount back just to sort of break even, right?
correct.
So how do you initially, I mean, you talk about your editor and how you came to meet your editor and cover artists and page layout people. How do you find all these people and make the connections with them?
A lot of them I've met at industry conventions over the year. And the industry conventions might be misleading. Just book conventions in general. Um there used to be a local one in St. Louis called PendCon that was really nice. Good way to meet people. Um, and some of them I even met through my local Writers Guild. So St. Louis Writers Guild is a nice resource, and I've heard good things about a lot of writers guilds out there. Facebook groups, like there's several good Facebook groups for writers. Um,
Specifically self-pubbed writers?
it's kind of broad. There are some that are very specifically focused on self-pub. There's a big one out there called Club Indie that's pretty focused on self-pub.
Do
Um,
you make a distinction between indie publishing and self-publishing? I was just curious.
it's I came into it at a time where it's kind of the same thing. It's like, but then independent bookstores kind of started reclaiming the indie title, and now like Indie Next and all that, and so it kind of depends on who you're talking to as
Mhm.
to how they feel about the terminology.
Okay.
So I'm kind of old school, so like I don't really mind either way. Some people might act kind of offended if one way or the other, and it's like there's really no difference. It's you're
Right.
independently publishing, you're self-publishing. It's,
Okay. So so you've got your book, you've done your cover art, you've done your edit, you've done your layout, formatting and such, and you're ready to go. So now we run into the next thing that you have to deal with that traditional publishing doesn't, sort of, kind of, which is marketing, right? How do you,
yes.
in a marketplace which is as crowded and frantic as this, where we're producing, I don't know, I've seen numbers of in excess of 1 million books a year now on Amazon and those kind of platforms. So it's very, very easy for
Wild.
any individual title to get lost. And how do you make sure that you're going to make your money back? And more, hopefully. Because, I mean, as you said, you have for 5 years, you have been living as a writer, making.
Yes.
Now, this is not an easy thing to do. And a lot of self-published authors never get to where you are, right?
It's true. So I started some folks look at like when I started as kind of the golden age of self-publishing because really early there was simple things you could do. Like you could run a BookBub ad, like get one BookBub ad, which if you're not familiar with BookBub, it's a newsletter that basically they send you books that are on sale in the genres you like to read. Hey, these are 99 cents this week. These are free this week. You could run one of those and the royalties from that would just be astronomical. I mean, it would be easy to pull down $3,000 or $5,000 a month, like in royalties after running one of those. And that it's just, more and more people found out about it. Traditional publishing started using it. Like you'll notice now a lot of BookBub promotions are for very well-known authors like Stephen King, Patricia Briggs, all those
Mhm.
folks. And it still works. It still works great. I love using free promotions to kind of drive sales to my longer series. Um, but it's not like the golden goose that it was 11, 10 years ago. So now I lean heavily on my newsletters.
Mhm.
So basically, in the back of every one of my books, there's a link that says, "Hey, sign up for my newsletter and get a free novella." So it's a packet of short stories from my urban fantasy series. If they signed up from one of my other series, it's giving them kind of a sneak peek at my urban fantasy stuff. And it's just something that's a little bit of an incentive to sign up for, another free story. So that's worked really well for me. And doing what they call newsletter swaps, where I will promote another author in my newsletter in exchange for them mentioning me in their newsletter. I've had good luck with that over the years. And that's something that hasn't really gone away. As long
Mhm.
as you don't run into folks that are spamming their newsletter list. Like
Right.
you don't need to send two newsletters out a week. Like I might send one a month. Like it's just not that.
Yeah, my newsletter, my newsletter recipients are lucky to hear from me more than a couple of times a year.
I can confirm that as one of your newsletter recipients.
So I'm sure you're very excited to do a newsletter trade-off with me. I'm sure
Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I'm terrible at this stuff. I've always been terrible at marketing, and it's part of the reason that I've stayed within traditional publishing because this stuff terrifies me. I'm not a business person. I don't know how to do this stuff, and I've always wanted to just focus on the words, you know.
Yeah.
Um,
And
but that's not a luxury you have. Now, are you doing, in terms of making decisions on advertising and other marketing options, are you doing all that yourself, or do you pay somebody to do it with you?
I'm currently doing that all myself. I do at times take on assistance here and there, just when I've got like an extraordinarily heavy load.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, right now, like even my paid campaigns, like meta ads and things like that, I build all that and run that myself. Um, that's one thing that I've taken. Like you see, like the courses for sale all the time from various people, and I've taken several of those, and they're great for a foundation, but you really got to get in there, spend the money, get the experience to understand how ads are going to work for your specific books. Like you can generalize things, but like the way I sell my books won't work for some of my romance author friends, which won't work for some of my middle grade author friends. And it's
Mm,
just, you just got to find your niche.
mm, mm. How does your time divide between writing and marketing?
Ugh. It varies like month to month. So if I have a release that month, my time for writing will be very little. Like I will be building so many stupid little graphics in Canva and scheduling newsletters and advertisements and ad campaigns. It eats up all my time.
Ah,
Um,
interesting.
yeah. Which reminds me, I have a release in like 3 weeks.
Right,
Ah.
right, right. Yeah, sorry. But I mean, but this is what I want us to get into, right? The sort of the hard realities, because I think sometimes people are like, "Oh, I don't want to go through all the hassle of
Yeah,
submitting to agents and stuff like that. I'll just self-pub." And it's like, this is a major undertaking
it's a lot of work.
and a lifestyle choice, right?
Yeah,
Mm.
it's true. It's a lot of work. And that not to say getting into trad isn't a lot of work, like querying
Sure.
agents and getting your agent locked down and then your agent querying your manuscript. I mean, it's just it's different kinds of work on both sides, and we just
Right.
have the overlap in creativity.
Yeah, right.
And
Yeah.
and it's yeah, yeah, it's wild. But I I love it. And one neat thing now that has really come around is it used to be if you self-published something, you would never ever be able to do anything traditional with that universe that you published again. Like it was just, as far as trad was concerned, it was dead. But
Mm,
now I have lots of friends who they have a self-published book take off, and then they get picked up by trad, either for a full deal or just for audio or just for print or something
mm.
like that. And it's just that I love the world of hybrid publishing that's really kind of coming into its own.
And by hybrid publishing, you mean people who are doing multiple traditional publishing, self-publishing, and the various
Yes.
forms thereof. Yeah, yeah. I mean, somebody like Matt Dinneman, the Dungeon Crawler Carl
Oh yeah.
series, those were originally self-published, right?
Yeah.
And then have been picked up by, I can't remember, Ace, maybe?
I don't remember it, but it was a really good deal.
Yeah.
It was awesome.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and this maybe is a good segue because obviously he's also done a lot of traffic through audiobooks, and I really wanted to talk to you about audio because, of course, again, back in the day, even when audio was becoming a thing, it was not something that self-published authors could easily get into. And now, it's often where some self-published authors are making the majority of their money, and it's decent money.
Yep. Yep.
So let's hear a little about your experience in that quarter.
So I think it was 2014, I started looking at ACX. And ACX is Audible's self-publishing arm. And that was a really neat experience because they let you list your project and request auditions from narrators. And at the time, there weren't that many people asking to do projects. So I got just an enormous amount of auditions for my urban fantasy series. And that kind of got me started on the whole thing. And what happened was I was really torn up on trying to decide between narrators. And the very last one to come in was this guy named William DeFries. And for those of you that don't know anything about Bill, he was a big voice actor in like kids shows and anime and things like that. And he was actually the original voice of Bob the Builder in the US. And I loved working with Bill. And Bill taught me so much about like what to look for in narrators and just like what not to do with audio and how to write my books even with a slant towards, hey, remember this is going to be an audiobook, so you don't have to put, Damien said, Sam said, blah, blah, blah.
Mhm,
Use
mhm,
action beats to break it all up. And it really changed my writing.
mhm,
But yeah, that kind of went on a tangent. But using that advice from Bill, when I was ready to do my Steamborn audiobooks, um, I had like a decision grid that my wife built for me, which is how I ended up working with Saskia. and Saskia Marleveld. If you're into audiobooks, you probably know Saskia. Like she's gotten really big. Early on with my audiobook stuff, I lucked out. Like they both worked with me for a fairly reasonable rate at the time. Well, I should say a fairly reasonable rate by today's standards. It was still pretty expensive for 10 years ago. Um,
And just to clarify, you're paying them up front or you're paying them a royalty from the product or both?
so you have the option. ACX has a royalty share option where essentially you don't pay them anything up front and the narrator does the work and you split the royalty 50-50 on the back end. And I
Mhm.
think the minimum length of that contract is 7 years. So it's a long commitment if you want to go that path. But if you don't have the upfront capital, it can be a great solution if you find a really good narrator that wants to work with you like that.
Mhm.
Um, I know Julia Whalen, that's currently the primary way she likes to work with independent projects. And so it's you can find some amazing people that are working on that royalty share. For me, I took like just what I want to say, the analytical approach and to see, well, if I put this amount of money into it, I would need to sell this number of units to make my money back at this royalty rate. So I ended up staying exclusive to ACX, which basically means my audiobooks are only sold on Audible and Apple. And then so that gave me a larger royalty share. So that allowed me to kind of suss out, okay, I need to sell 800 or 1,000 or 1,500 audiobooks to get my money back.
So,
Which
I mean, you don't have to say what specifics in terms of what you're paying, but ballpark, what are we talking for to pay a decent narrator to do a full novel?
So it varies a lot. Basically with audiobooks, you're paying per finished hour. And
Mm.
what that means per finished hour, if the final product, the final audiobook is 10 hours long, you're paying them for 10 hours of work. Um, so when you see the per finished hour rates, it's like, whoa, they're making $300 an hour. It's like they actually worked a lot more than 10 hours to make that audiobook.
Right.
So
And does
I
that include
find that like
production
once you get
costs and
it depends on who you work with. It depends
Mm.
on who you work with. So like one of my recent projects, I want to say the per finished hour was $100 for post-production. So on top of what I was paying the narrator, then post-production was $100 per hour. So basically an extra $1,000 on a 10-hour audiobook.
Mhm.
But I find, and there's always exceptions, you know, but I find if you get in like the $300 per finished hour range and higher, you really start running into some extremely professional narrators.
Mhm.
But
So,
some of them you'll see are like 1,200 per hour. I mean, it gets up there.
well, and presumably also some of what you're paying for is name recognition that people who have particular favorite audio narrators or they've seen them in some TV show or something, and so that brings you some extra built-in marketing clout.
It's true.
But I mean, so we're talking, several $1,000s to do it. So you've got to move a fair number. I mean, as an audiobook consumer, I get frustrated with Audible because the browse system seems so terrible, that it's hard to discover things that you don't already know about. So I'm always scared of putting a lot of money into audio because I'm afraid that the book will vanish without trace, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. No. And that's another one that marketing really plays a role with it. I
What kind of
have
marketing are you doing for audio?
audio newsletters again,
Mhm.
and I also have whenever I have a new release, I usually run a lot of meta ad campaigns. Um, that's kind of my two big ones. And then also if you're exclusive with ACX, they give you download codes that you can hand out to like your listeners. So I have what's called an ARC team that I will I'll give them early copies of my stuff. They'll tell me about typos, which is wonderful. And then they'll often leave a review for me, like close to release. So I'll also offer them the free codes. They can listen to it, and if they like it and leave a review early on, that can help drive some visibility, which is nice. But I think the ads are probably the biggest thing when it comes to that.
So let's talk about that because again, this is something I know nothing about. I've never paid for an ad in my life, so I don't really know how this works
Oh
or
wow. Man, I'm kind of jealous.
well, I mean, it doesn't necessarily. I mean, as you know, in this business, it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm selling a lot of books without ads. It just means I haven't paid for the ads.
Fair, fair. Basically, for me, advertising is like figuring out one of the hardest things is figuring out like who my audience is for the book. Because ideally, it's like, oh, everyone wants to read all my books, and it's like, no,
Mm,
no, they do not. Like you could say it's accessible to everyone, but it does not mean everyone wants to read your books. Um, so once I figure that out, generally trying to figure out where the crossovers are with like large media tie-ins. So if like my urban fantasy, for example, it's got some vampires in it, it's got some of those old school urban fantasy vibes. So like what kind of television shows fit into that? Well, you've got like Supernatural, Buffy the Vampire Slayer. They're not an exact fit. It's not exactly what's going on, but there's several people who would probably watch those that would also enjoy the book.
mm,
So kind of altering my targeting to focus on people like that is
mm,
how I used to do it all the time. And the other catch with marketing, especially with meta ads right now, it changes all the time. So they're big on incorporating machine learning into their advertising right now, which basically means they want to figure out your audience for you, which might get you cheaper clicks, but might not actually be getting you conversions. So getting used to doing split testing while you're doing advertising campaigns. Some websites have, oh man, I'm gonna forget what it's called now. Amazon just rolled out a tracking link that will tell you if a click converted into a sale without being an affiliate link. So it's all within terms and conditions. That way you can actually tell if your ad is converting into sales. Because old days it's all just guesswork. It's like,
mm.
well, I look at what I spent in a month. Did that trend upwards? Did my ranks go up? Or was it all kind of stagnant? Or go down, which can happen. You've got to be comfortable with going into it, running dozens of ads, knowing that you might get one that works well, and the rest you just need to kill off.
Huh.
So it's really a trial and error test, split test, and
And where are these ads appearing?
mostly on Facebook and Instagram. Those are kind of my two major targets.
Not on Amazon itself. You don't advertise there directly.
Right now, I don't, but the AMS ads, they do work well. I don't think they even call them AMS ads anymore. Uh, the Amazon advertising. Those can work really well. I have some friends that that's their main source of advertising. But if you're just getting into it, I would really recommend pick one platform and focus on that and learn that in and out.
And in addition to advertising on, say, Facebook and Instagram, do you also feel like you have to maintain a very active social media presence just as yourself, as an indirect advertising strategy?
You know, I don't probably post as much as I should, so I guess I don't feel that way. But yeah, I mean I still post at least a few times a month just to like let people know what I'm up to and
Mm.
things like that.
I remember, good, what, 10 years ago when I had a book out and I was asking my editor how it was doing. And she said, I'll never forget her saying, you need to spend more time on Twitter. And I was like, "Wha- what? People need to feel like they know you so they want to read your books. And I'm like, no, I'm not gonna, I'm just not gonna do,
Yeah. Yeah,
no?
and we both have friends, especially from Dragon Con, that are significantly in a different direction on that topic. That they will post, they'll schedule a post to repeat. I mean, I remember some folks back in the day would schedule tweets, promotional
Mhm.
tweets to go out multiple times per day, every day. just in the thought that like it's not going to show the same people the same thing. And
Right.
I don't know. I've never seen any kind of benefit to that, but that's not to say that doesn't work for somebody else. And
Okay, so then let's talk about other funding options and maybe, Kickstarter, for example.
Kickstarter, I think Kickstarter, I can easily say is my new favorite platform. My first Kickstarter, I didn't really know what I was doing. I was just like, I want a fancy book for the 10th anniversary of my first publication. So I just Googled and found some recommendations on local printers that could do nice covers and like leather editions. And I found a company called 48 Hour Books. They did a great job. Um, they're a bit more expensive than other printers, because it's not a print on demand shop. Like they're doing like, stitched bindings and it's
Wow.
very nice stuff. So Kickstarter, there's a group if you're really interested in digging into it called Kickstarter for Authors. And it's run by Anthea Sharp. And she also has a book that's phenomenal introduction to running a Kickstarter for authors. It doesn't completely sidestep the need for a capital investment up front because you kind of need the cover done already and
Mhm.
mocked up so you can show people what they're backing.
Right.
And for if someone out there is not familiar with Kickstarter at all, it's basically a crowdfunding platform where you put a project out there, people pledge to it, and at the end of it, you're responsible for getting them the rewards that they pledged for.
Right. Because they can pledge at different levels and get different stuff
Yes.
back, right?
Yes. So I like for my last campaign for my Cozy Fantasy, I had special edition paperbacks. I had special edition hardcovers, which AJ showed earlier. And I also had like lettered editions where I would go in and do like a stenciled like gothic letter on the inside, like just 1 to 26, which is kind of it's an old
Mhm.
publishing house tradition for some of the limited stuff. And I needed to have all that mocked up so that people could see it. My very first campaign, all I had was the cover. I didn't really have anything else fancy to show off. I didn't understand how to build the campaign because I hadn't been studying the platform as much as I should. So my first Kickstarter, I think it ended up bringing in around $6,000. And then like well over half of that went to acquiring the books, shipping them out, and getting all that done. Um, my
Right. I was
subsequent
going to say, because when you're doing that kind of sort of a particular locally produced edition, then you have shipping and all the rest of it, which I
oh
would have
yeah,
thought takes a lot of time and money.
oh yeah. And then my subsequent campaigns did much better, and they did well enough that I was able to get into some of the larger print run companies.
And when you say
Yeah, I
large
don't.
print run, what are we? How many of these are you producing for each Kickstarter? How many leather
Like
bound volumes and such?
I
What's
think
the?
my last one we did a print run of about 500 copies. Um, several of which are still in my basement, but hey, they're on my website. So you can kind of use that extra inventory to stock your own website and use for book signings and things, which is great.
Mm,
Um, but a lot of the folks in the US that print special editions, the companies that print special editions, don't really work with self-published authors. Like it's hard to find somebody that'll do things like the Gilded Edges. So
mm.
you kind of have to start looking overseas in the UK,
Oh,
Vietnam, China, and they have the equipment and the willingness to work with like all levels of publishing, which is really nice. And they do some phenomenal stuff. So it kind of depends on what you're looking for and how fancy you want to get. Like I really wanted those like ribbon bookmarks and the gilded edges, so like I had to find a printer that would do that. And that's another thing that those Facebook groups are really great for finding. So that
well, these. That's-
yes. And the Kickstarter for authors especially, like I can't recommend them enough. Just to go in there, poke around and kind of learn what other authors are doing.
Now, this
Yeah.
has obviously worked out for you well, but I mean, presumably you know people who've spent a lot of money and it hasn't worked out.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Including me.
Okay.
So
So When that happens, are you able to say, "Oh, I did this. This was a mistake. I shouldn't have done this," or is it a crapshoot?
Some of it's really obvious. Like I sank a lot of money into German translations, um, which did not go well. So so that was one of those things like I loved it. Like I love having German editions and I have a lot of German readers because of it, but like the cost to the return was just not there.
Because
And
of what you were paying translators?
yeah, yeah. I mean, it'll probably earn out in like maybe 5 years. Like it's going to be
Mhm.
a long time. And in the meantime, you're just out all that investment, which for some people, like, oh, 5 years is fine to start getting a return. And it's like, when it's
Yeah, yeah,
tens
yeah.
of thousands of dollars, like, no,
Right.
that's
But
not
of course,
okay.
in when you're doing foreign editions, you're just coming up with it and approaching people and say, "Let's do this, and I'll pay you this." It's not like you have to have some representative at the Frankfurt Book Fair
Correct.
looking to shop your material and have somebody else. Yeah.
Which honestly, I think might be a better approach for a lot of people is getting an agent to sell your foreign rights.
Mhm.
And then you don't have to worry about, oh, am I hiring a translator that's actually going to do a good job, or is it going to be just filled with typos? Like I ran it through, Google Translate and just published it. Like, oh, and please don't
Right.
do that.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Please don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. So what else? Any other things that I've already kept you longer than I said I would. So,
Oh, no worries.
but anything that you would offer as particular either advice or insight based on your particular journey as a writer and publisher?
I think one of the big things for me, as long as you don't mind being around people, um, is getting out to conventions and like talking to other authors who are doing what you want to do, who are already being successful with it, that are willing to talk to you. Like, offer to buy them a drink, offer to take them out for lunch and just chat with them for a half hour or an hour and like find out what other people are doing in the industry because a lot of folks will ask me how I got my start and it's like I can tell you exactly what I did, exactly everything that worked, but what worked for me in 2013 will not work today. Like
Mm,
it's so much stuff has changed and be willing to adapt to those changes. Like if you want to go down the marketing path, be willing to try new things, experiment with new things and adapt to, like, you might have an ad that works for 6 months straight and then it will just collapse. Don't
mm.
worry about it. Shut it off. Find the next thing. It's just don't stop.
It's a lot of work at the sort of marketing end, isn't it?
It is. It
I
is.
think as I said before, I think sometimes people think that this is somehow an easier option, and it does not seem that way to me.
It's really, yeah, no. I mean, one of the things for me is like having that control over the projects, like especially being able to pick my cover artists and things like that, which of course I'll have somebody that comes back and says, "Oh, wow, you picked the wrong cover artist for that." It's like, well, that is your opinion. Thank you.
Do you feel obligated to be producing a lot? I mean, what's your average in terms of output per year?
I think right now I'm probably sitting at about 3 manuscripts a year. I don't publish that many per year though. I like to kind of have, I say I don't publish that many per year, but I published that many this year, didn't I? Usually I don't. This year was an exception because like my Steamborn series ended this year and I'm launching the Cozy series. So yeah.
Mm-mm-mm.
But I'm generally happy if I just get 2 books out there. I think 2 books is like
Yeah.
a healthy rate for me where I don't feel like I'm grinding myself down and it's affecting like the creativity part. Because like the thing I love is the creativity part of writing. Like
Yeah.
I I enjoy marketing because I can be decent at it, but it's definitely not what brings me the most satisfaction.
I mean, 2 to 3 books a year is about my sort of speed as well, though for me, that means I have to be working with multiple publishers because
Yeah.
they're not going to let me do it otherwise. Anything else? Final thoughts?
No, no, like if you decide to go down that path, like best of luck with it. And it's it's fun, like especially if you take it on as like a hybrid project where you've got some traditional stuff and then you've got some self-publishing stuff. Like it's a lot of fun to kind of go down multiple paths.
Mm-mm. And let's end by saying where people can find your stuff.
Oh yeah. So kind of my home base is ericarasher.com. And you can find me on pretty much any major retailer. And my audiobooks are mostly on Audible. Some of them you'll find wide because I have to experiment with stuff. And yeah, hopefully you'll run into me at a couple conventions next year.
And when you say every major retailer, you're talking about online retailers rather than physical stores, yeah?
Yeah, both. Yeah.
Both. So
Yeah, most of my books are distributed through Ingram too. And so if they don't have them on the shelf, they'll order them in for you.
right. Yeah. Okay, cool. Great. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you sharing your expertise, particularly in areas where it's out of my welkin, as they say, or as they used to say. Um, yeah, this is stuff that I just don't know that much about. So I really appreciate it. I'm sure a lot of people are going to find it absolutely fascinating. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
So there you go. I think Eric obviously knows a ton, lots of great stuff there. Check out his work. Read some of his stuff. That's always the best thank you a writer can get. Feel free to ask questions, and Eric hopefully will weigh in as well in the comments section. So that's all. Please, as ever, like, comment, subscribe, check out my books. Check out my Patreon page, and thank you to my patrons who make this channel possible. Check out my merchandise, and that's all. I will talk to you soon. Cheers. Bye.